for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson, and I'm going to be your host today. We've got quite a bit to talk about, including Donald Trump now says it's okay to wear a mask, and it's only because he thinks that wearing a mask makes him look like a particular 1950s television character. I'll explain that in a little bit. We've got arrests involving associates of Jeffrey Epstein, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Before we get into today's topics, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime you like at Spreaker.com. Do a search for Southpaws there. You can also find us at the iTunes Store. Do a search for Southpaws under podcast. And once you found our logo, you found us. Links to our podcast are sent to our Facebook and our Twitter accounts. You can also listen to the show at YouTube.com. Just do a search for Southpaws Radio there. And, of course, you can hear us on great Pacifica stations across the country, including KCEI-FM in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and Global Community Radio Channel 1. We're on every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Make sure you check us out there as well. Now, we have some new listeners, hopefully, and if you're joining us for the first time, we want to thank you for joining us. For you listeners that have been with us for a while, you're probably wondering where Jack Prince is. And I talked to Jack on Thursday. We're recording on Friday, July 3rd, 2020. There has been a tremendous loss within Jack's family. Again, I'm not going to go into any details on this, but our hearts are broken. My heart is broken for Jack, and I worry about him. I talked to him at great length yesterday, told him that I loved him. Jack has requested to take some time off from the show, and I don't blame him. So Jack is going to take a cross-country trip for the next month or so and just kind of clear his head. And again, I am fully supportive of his decision to do this. So I'm going to be recording the show by myself today. Next week on the show, I'm going to be joined by an old fill-in co-host. Katie Steele will be joining us next Friday. So make sure you listen to next week's show. It's going to be a really good one. And again, please stay with me for this week's episode. Jack, we love you, and we're thinking of you, and we hope you get some closure and some peace in life. Before we get on to our topics for today, I've got one other story that I want to mention. This one's a little on the funny side. I got home last night pretty close to 9:30 in the evening, and there's a strange guy walking in my yard. And I pull up, I said, "Can I help you?" And he says, "Do you own a horse?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, there's a horse running loose, and we thought it was yours." And I looked, and there's a horse in the wheat field. We found out that it's a neighbor behind our house. Unfortunately, the neighbor is out of town for the time being. Whoever they got to take care of the horse left both gates open, so the horse just wandered out and said, "Freedom, I'm free." And so he left and decided to come visit us. Well, this morning, there is a horse tied up to one of our trees in the front yard. So just a funny story. I have not taken a picture of him. I might do that. If I do, I will put it up on our official Facebook page. So make sure you look for that. But I thought that was just kind of a funny story. Seems like all the weird stuff has been happening this week. So I don't know if it's the full moon. I don't know if it's just the silliness of the coronavirus. Not really exactly sure what's going on. But anyway, speaking of the coronavirus, let's get into our topics today. Earlier in the week, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is basically the chief expert on the coronavirus in this country, warned us that we could see 100,000 new cases every day in the United States if things don't get under control soon. And the way things are going, it doesn't look like it's going to be under control anytime soon, except for the states that actually have Democratic governors that either have a Democratic state legislature or in the case of Michigan, where Governor Gretchen Whitmer has all the power solely based on the 1945 Emergency Powers Act. So, which, by the way, the Republicans are still fighting in this state. There's supposed to be a lawsuit heard in the Michigan Supreme Court in September. This was ordered by a federal judge that the Michigan State Supreme Court had to rule on this. But the Supreme Court of Michigan has said, no, the Court of Appeals needs to rule on it first. So the Michigan Court of Appeals has until sometime in August to make a ruling on the emergency powers of the governor. So we'll see what happens. The coronavirus cases are down in Michigan, and you can blame that totally on Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She's the one that installed all of the executive orders, closed all the businesses. Everybody said, well, but I have my freedom. Yeah, you have your freedom, as Jack says. Free-dumb. You're free to be dumb. Speaking of dumb, let's get to this. I've got this story. This is Rebecca Shabbat writing for NBC News. This is dated July 2nd. Out of Washington, Herman Cain, the 2012 Republican presidential candidate and businessman, has tested positive for COVID-19 more than a week after attending Donald Trump's Tulsa rally, a statement posted to his official Twitter account said on Thursday. The statement said, quote, "There's no way of knowing for sure how or where Mr. Cain contracted the coronavirus, but we do know he is a fighter who has beaten stage 4 cancer," end of quote. Cain is currently receiving treatment at an Atlanta hospital. I wonder if his bill is going to be $999. Remember, he had the 999 plan when he ran in 2012? Jim Garner, when he was a host on the show, said that sounds like the price of a pizza. The significance of that is that Herman Cain used to run Godfather's Pizza at one point. Continuing the story from NBC, while there's no way to pinpoint exactly where he contracted the virus, Cain's Trump rally in Tulsa on June 20th and posted a photo of himself with others at the event, which showed him without a mask on. The 74-year-old tested positive on June 29th, according to the statement on his page. After testing positive for COVID-19 on Monday, he developed symptoms, quote, serious enough that he required hospitalization, end of quote, and spent the last night in the hospital where he's been resting comfortably on Thursday, the statement said. And it continued, quote, Mr. Cain did not require a respirator and he is awake and alert, end of quote. Cain, who is an official surrogate for Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, wrote an op-ed after the rally in which he defended the event, writing this, quote, the media worked very hard to scare people out of attending the Trump campaign rally last Saturday night in Tulsa. Yes, there were some empty seats in the nosebleed sections, but 16,000 people in the COVID-19 era is pretty impressive, end of quote. Well, it wasn't 16,000 people. It was more like 6,000 to 8,000. And it wasn't just the upper nosebleed section that had empty seats. It was all over the building. and by the way, millennials are taking credit for asking for tickets and then not showing up. So good on them. Continuing the story from NBC, since the rally, multiple people who attended the rally have tested positive for the virus, including a journalist and at least 2 members of the campaign's advance team. In addition, 6 campaign staffers tested positive hours before the rally as well, but they were not present at the event. Trump's campaign said in a statement Thursday that Trump did not meet with Cain at the rally. Campaign spokesman Tim Murtaugh said, quote, Contact tracing was conducted after the Tulsa rally, but we did not comment regarding the medical information of individuals. Regardless, Mr. Cain did not meet with Trump. End of quote. He said the president. We don't refer to Trump as the president on this show. We just refer to him as Trump. If you want to get really technical, you just call him the dictator, because that's what he thinks he is, and that's the way he acts. And that's the truth. And if you don't like it, you can turn the channel. You can listen to Rush Limbaugh. I don't care. I'm going to tell you the truth on this show. The truth is we see it. That's been the motto of this show since we started in 2012, and we've been on the air ever since. Speaking of which, I have another story about mask deniers. These are science deniers, folks. You might as well just call them science deniers because they don't believe in science. They don't believe medical officials. They believe Rush Limbaugh. They believe Sean Hannity. They believe Bill the Clown. They believe their orange dictator, Donald Trump. And I have this story. This is from Newsweek. This is Ilea Salisco writing on June 27th. The co-founder of a movement to reopen Maryland at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic has tested positive for the virus after refusing to wear a face mask. Tim Walters helped organize rallies with the group Reopen Maryland, demanding that Maryland Governor Larry Hogan rescind his stay-at-home order in April. Earlier this week, Walters said he had tested positive for COVID-19 in a series of Facebook videos, some of which have since been deleted. In a video on Tuesday, Walters said, quote, I was diagnosed yesterday at the ER with COVID-19, and here I am months after not wearing a mask at rallies, churches, and so on, and so it's funny how capricious this thing is, end of quote. The Capital Gazette newspaper was the first to report on the test result, by the way. Walters, a Republican candidate in 2 failed bids for the Maryland House of Delegates, said that he first experienced a dry cough in March before eventually developing vision problems, headaches, and a fever. The 53-year-old said he also has diabetes, while admitting he does not always maintain healthy habits. Walters suggested that those he has recently come into contact with should monitor their symptoms. However, he is refusing to cooperate with Maryland contact tracers by providing any personal information that could help them contain the virus. Walters reportedly said, quote, I will not share anybody's information with the government. I will not do it. End of quote. Let me stop there for a second. In other words, he's saying, I'm selfish and I don't care if everybody else gets the virus. Just treat me while I'm sick. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is, folks. Let's just cut right to it. Continuing the story from Newsweek. In a video posted Friday, he said he was attempting to open his own church and blamed Satan for his contracting the virus, while insisting that COVID-19 had never been spread during the anti-lockdown rallies. Oh, so it's Satan's fault that he's sick. Are you kidding me? Really, it's Satan's fault. Cuckoo, cuckoo. Let me continue. Walters said, quote, no one ever got sick at any of our rallies, to include me. Start a church and I get sick. I got it because Satan deemed to get it, because he wanted to quiet my work, to slow down the building of a church. That's what this is about, but the world won't see that. Why? Because they live behind a veil. They choose to hate God. End of quote. Oh, now we choose to hate God, really. They keep coming out of the woodwork, folks. It's unbelievable. Let me continue the story again. This is Newsweek. Walters also said that he has been going into public without a mask for months, insisted that he has not changed one iota despite testing positive, although he said he had stayed home for most of the past week. Newsweek reached out to Walters for comment but did not receive a response in time for publication. While cases are multiplying in many states, Maryland has seen a recent steady decline in COVID-19. However, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan has urged residents to not become complacent in continuing efforts to contain any further spread of the virus as the state moves forward with reopening plans. Hogan said in a statement, quote, Now more than ever, as we begin to come into contact with more people, we must all continue to remain vigilant. Our health and economic recovery depends on all of us continuing to exercise personal responsibility in order to keep ourselves, our family members, our neighbors, and our coworkers safe. We encourage all Marylanders to get tested, wear a mask, and practice physical distancing. End of quote. Yeah, that's the key to it. Wear a mask. Wear a mask. There's been videos that have popped up all over social media and on the broadcast media over the last week of people being confronted for not wearing a mask. Real simple. If you can tolerate to wear one, wear one. If you can tolerate it and you don't wear one, you're being selfish. You're saying that I only care about myself. I don't care about anybody else. Unfortunately, that has been the culture of this country since Ronald Reagan was president. It used to be all about we. Now it's all about me. That's what's going to kill us. People need to start thinking. Start using that noodle inside of your brain. Not that limp noodle. You need to use the noodle in your brain. Get it working. Think about things. Wear a mask. Because I tell you what, you get near me and you're not wearing a mask and you don't back up 6 feet, we're going to have problems. And by the way, if you want a good dissertation on that, I encourage you to listen, especially if you're professional wrestling fans, listen to this week's episode of the Jim Cornette Drive-Thru. Right at the very beginning, he talks about an encounter that he had at the U.S. Post Office with a guy that didn't want to wear a mask and started getting huffy and puffy about it. Let's just say there was a lot of profanity. And by the way, I'm going to warn you, if you listen to that podcast, there's a lot of uncensored profanity in there. So let me just warn you about that before we go any further. But in other coronavirus news, I can't even believe this is an actual quote. I've had to double check just to make sure that it wasn't the Onion. But this is not. It's the Associated Press. This is Amara Madani and Darlene Supperville writing for AP. This was dated Thursday out of Washington. After long resisting wearing a mask in public, Donald Trump said Wednesday he thinks it makes him look like the Lone Ranger, and he likes it. Really? I think Clayton Moore might have an issue with that. You know what? I got a feeling. The next rally that Donald Trump has, instead of coming out to Lee Greenwood's Proud to be an American, God Bless the USA, which I hate that song, I got a feeling Trump's going to come out to this one.
The Lone Ranger. A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Hi-Yo Silver.
Donald Trump. Not. Clayton Moore's got to be spinning in his grave over this one. Really. Donald Trump comparing himself to the Lone Ranger. Just take a look at what the Lone Ranger stood for. Hell, take a look at what Clayton Moore stood for in life. Because Clayton Moore lived the Lone Ranger character. He really did. And take a look at Donald Trump and how he's lived his life. Let's see. I don't think Clayton Moore would get an orange spray tan. I don't think that Clayton Moore would repeatedly cheat on his wives. I don't think Clayton Moore would say about his daughter, if she wasn't my daughter, I'd date her. It's unbelievable. Here we go. Let me go back to the story here before I get too far sidetracked. Trump told Fox Business propaganda channel in an interview, quote, I'm all for the masks. I think masks are good. People have seen me wearing one. End of quote. Trump's comments came a day after Republican lawmakers suggested that he wear a mask in public to set a good example for Americans. In the interview, Trump said, quote, if I were in a tight situation with people, I would, absolutely. End of quote. Trump has long resisted being photographed in a mask. In early April, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommended that people wear cloth face coverings in public settings where other social distancing measures were difficult to maintain. Trump immediately undercut the CDC guidance by flatly stating that he wouldn't be following it, suggesting it would be unseemly for the commander-in-chief to wear a mask as he meets with heads of state. On Wednesday, he sounded a different tone, saying, quote, "I had a mask on. I sort of liked the way I looked. Okay, I thought it was okay. It was a dark black mask, and I thought it looked okay. It looked like the Lone Ranger." End of quote. I got to stop there because I'm just laughing too much. Of course, the Lone Ranger is a reference to the fictional Law and Order character from the American Old West who wore a black eye mask. Trump continued, quote, "I have no problem with that, and if people feel good about it, they should do it." End of quote. Now, let me stop there for a quick second. So, if Trump thinks he's the Lone Ranger, does Pence think he's Tano or Dan Reed? Maybe Pence thinks he's Silver. Who knows? Could be Scout. I don't. It's unbelievable. It's making my brain hurt. Continuing the AP story, in recent days, many Republicans and members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force have been more outspoken in advocating for Americans to wear face masks in public settings as infections have surged in huge swaths of the South and West. The presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, said last week that he would pursue a federal mask mandate if elected. In the interview, Trump suggested a federal mandate was unnecessary and continued to frame mask wearing as a matter of choice. Even so, Trump criticized Biden for wearing a mask while he is some distance away from his audience and for speaking through the covering at times. In a separate interview Wednesday on America This Week, Trump said, quote, "When there's nobody around, I don't see any reason to be wearing it." End of quote. About the virus, Trump continued to characterize it as a nuisance that he hopes will just go away. Continuing, Trump said this on Fox Business propaganda channel, quote, "I think we are going to be very good with the coronavirus. I think that at some point that's going to sort of just disappear. I hope." End of quote. I got news for you, Trump. You're not a scientist. It's not going away. You better listen to Fauci. You better listen to actual scientists that know what the hell they're talking about, instead of just listening to yourself talk in the mirror at yourself. Let me continue the story here. White House senior advisor Kellyanne Conway noted Wednesday that Trump is regularly tested for the coronavirus, as are his aides. White House visitors and members of the news media who are in close proximity to him and Vice President Mike Pence are also tested. Conway said, quote, "I've said wear them. The First Lady has said wear them. The President's administration has said wear them." End of quote. Trump also told Fox Business propaganda channel that people have seen him wearing a mask, but only one image has surfaced of Trump wearing a mask. He donned it for a behind-the-scenes tour of a Ford facility in Michigan in May. Reporters were not allowed to accompany Trump on the tour. Afterwards, he told reporters he had worn a mask in a back area only because, quote, "I didn't want to give the press the pleasure of seeing it." End of quote. Other world leaders, including Canada's Justin Trudeau and France's Emmanuel Macron, have worn masks in public to encourage their use. Trump on Wednesday also continued to push back against the notion that some states may have been too quick to open up. Several states, including Florida, New York, and Texas, have paused or slowed down reopening amid the recent increase in confirmed cases. Trump suggested Democrats are hyping concerns about the spike to politically damage him. Trump said, quote, "I think the Democrats would like to see the country stay closed as long as possible because they figured that's probably good for the election because it would be bad a little bit for jobs and maybe a lot for jobs." End of quote. So here he goes again. It's Trump. Oh, it's nothing but a Democratic hoax. This is their new hoax, which is what he has said. It's crazy. And people still listen to him and take everything he says as gospel. Folks, we're at about 3 million infections in this country. If we haven't hit it already, we're rapidly approaching it. And Fauci says we could see 100,000 new cases a day. Folks, this should scare the hell out of you. Put a mask on. If you go out in public, put a mask on. Don't bitch about it. Don't complain about it. Mask it or casket. Your choice, folks. You better listen. All right, speaking of, we might even have a new pandemic coming. I have this story. This is Michelle Roberts, who is the health editor for the British Broadcasting Company's online news. This is dated June 30th. A new strain of flu that has the potential to become a pandemic has been identified in China by scientists. It emerged recently and is carried by pigs but can infect humans, they say. The researchers are concerned that it could mutate further so that it could spread easily from person to person and trigger a global outbreak. While it is not an immediate problem, they say it has all the hallmarks of being highly adapted to infect humans and needs close monitoring. As it's new, people could have little or no immunity to the virus. The scientists write in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that measures to control the virus in pigs and the close monitoring of swine industry workers should be swiftly implemented. A bad news strain of influenza is among the top disease threats that experts are watching for, even as the world attempts to bring an end to the current coronavirus pandemic. The last pandemic flu the world encountered, which was the swine flu outbreak in 2009, was less deadly than initially feared, largely because many older people had some immunity to it, probably because of its similarity to other flu viruses that had circulated years before. That virus, called AH1N1-PDM09, is now covered by the annual flu vaccine to make sure people are protected. The new flu strain that has been identified in China is similar to the 2009 swine flu, but with some new changes. So far, it hasn't posed a big threat, but Professor Qin Chao Cheng and colleagues who have been studying it say it is one to keep an eye on. The virus, which the researchers call G4EA-H1N1, can grow and multiply in the cells that line the human airways. Doesn't this sound familiar, folks? They found evidence of recent infection in people who worked in abattoirs and the swine industry in China when they looked at data from 2011 to 2018. Current flu vaccines do not appear to protect against it, although they could be adapted to do so if needed. Professor Qin Chao Cheng, who works at Nottingham University in the UK, told the BBC, quote, "Right now we are distracted with coronavirus, and rightly so, but we must not lose sight of potentially dangerous new viruses," end of quote. While this new virus is not an immediate problem, he says, quote, "we should not ignore it," end of quote. In theory, a flu pandemic could occur at any time, but they are still rare events. Pandemics happen if a new strain emerges that can easily spread from person to person. Although flu viruses are constantly changing, which is why the flu vaccine also needs to change regularly to keep up, they do not usually go pandemic. Professor James Wood, head of the Department of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Cambridge, said the work comes as a salutary reminder that we are constantly at risk of new emergence of pathogens and that farmed animals with which humans have greater contact than with wildlife may act as the source for important pandemic viruses. A World Health Organization spokeswoman said, quote, "Eurasian avian-like swine influenza virus are known to be circulating in the swine population in Asia and to be able to infect humans sporadically. Twice a year during the influenza vaccine composition meetings, all information on the viruses is reviewed and the need for new candidate vaccine viruses is discussed. We will carefully read the paper to understand what is new. It also highlights that we cannot let down our guard on influenza. We need to be vigilant and continue surveillance even during the COVID-19 pandemic." End of quote. Gee, what could be next? Is the comet coming next? Is an asteroid going to hit the Earth? Is it going to be the killer bees? What is it? What's next? Earthquakes at Yellowstone? Who knows? They've already had locusts in India. They had a big locust plague in India just within the last couple of weeks. So Why not? Trump could get reelected. Maybe that'll be next. Who knows? Speaking of Trump, we have some more Trump news. This is Carol E. Lee and Kristen Welker writing for NBC News. This is dated June 29th. Donald Trump set off a 5-alarm fire in the White House Sunday morning after he retweeted a video of one of his supporters saying "white power," according to 2 White House officials. The video remained on Trump's Twitter page, where he has 82 million followers, for more than 3 hours because White House officials couldn't reach him to ask him to delete it, the 2 officials said. Trump was at his golf club in Virginia and had put his phone down, the officials said. Aides also tried unsuccessfully to reach Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino to ask him to delete the retweet, officials said. Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, added to the urgency when he called the tweet indefensible and demanded that Trump take it down during an interview on CNN, the officials said. Once officials were able to reach Trump, he agreed to delete the tweet. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany and Senior Advisor Jared Kushner were among those trying to contain the fallout. McEnany said Monday that Trump had watched the video before retweeting it, but didn't hear his supporters say "white power." Oh, really? I don't believe that for a second. Oh, I never heard "white power." Really? Yep, that's what I think about that. Continuing the story, officials said Trump gets a deluge of content from aides and allies, with one of them saying the white power incident was a, quote, lesson to all of us in the White House to be more aware of what's out there, end of quote. In April, Trump retweeted a posting that included the hashtag Fire Fauci. When asked at the time whether he had noticed the hashtag when he retweeted it, Trump said, quote, "Yeah, I notice everything," end of quote. So he just admitted that he heard white power and he didn't care. He decided to retweet it anyway. Trump's a racist. You want my opinion? He's a racist. He's a narcissist. He's a scumbag. That's exactly what Donald Trump is. Speaking of scumbags, I have this story. This is Jonathan Dienst, Joe Valaquette, Tom Winter, and Sarah Fitzpatrick, writing for WNBC Television out of New York City. Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite and heiress who became a confidant of disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and was later implicated in his alleged sexual crimes, has been arrested by the FBI. She was arrested in Bradford, New Hampshire around 8:30 a.m. Thursday on charges she conspired with Epstein to sexually abuse minors. She was found living at a reclusive $1 million luxury home with 156 acres of rural mountainside property, federal prosecutors said. In a brief electronic appearance in New Hampshire federal court Thursday afternoon, a judge remanded her to the custody of the U.S. Marshals and ordered her transferred to New York City. She did not enter a plea, and her attorney indicated he will seek a detention hearing in New York, a prelude to a possible bail request. The 6-count indictment in Manhattan federal court alleges that Maxwell helped Epstein groom girls as young as 14 years old, going back as far as 1994. Prosecutors say she was in the room during and took part in the sexual abuse of 3 underage girls at Epstein's Upper East Side townhouse, his Florida estate, and his ranch in New Mexico. She faces up to 35 years in prison. Acting Manhattan U.S. Attorney Audrey Strauss said at a news conference on the indictment, quote, "This case against Ghislaine Maxwell is the prequel to the earlier case we brought against Jeffrey Epstein," end of quote. The FBI said that it had been tracking her movements for some time, though she was not indicted until June 29th. The daughter of British media baron Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine was a one-time girlfriend of Epstein's and was at the high-flying investor's side for decades. But she was also alleged to have helped Epstein groom girls for sex with the rich and powerful. One of those teenagers, again, these are teenage girls, folks. One of those teens, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, leveled that charge against Maxwell in a 2015 defamation suit as have a number of other women since. And actually, WNBC has a link on here to the indictment. So if you want to take a good look at that, we've actually got a link to that story on our Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show to find that story from NBC New York. The indictment says, quote, in some instances, Maxwell was present for and participated in the sexual abuse of minor victims, end of quote. Epstein, a registered sex offender who nonetheless kept company with presidents and captains of industry, was arrested last summer on new federal charges of exploiting dozens of underage girls in New York and Florida in the early 2000s. He supposedly, I'm going to paraphrase here because of the way they've got this wrote and what probably happened are two different things. According to WNBC, he attempted suicide in custody in late July and then died after another suicide attempt in early August, which I'm going to stop there. I do not believe that account whatsoever. I believe Epstein was murdered, and you can quote me on that. Continuing the story, 2 of the guards tasked with monitoring Epstein at the Metropolitan Correctional Center now face federal charges for not properly supervising him before his death, and I'm going to stop there. They found their patsies. That's who's going to pay the price for covering up Jeffrey Epstein's murder, my opinion. Let me continue here. One day before his suicide, a federal appeals court released the transcript of a 2016 deposition in which Epstein repeatedly refused to say whether Maxwell had procured young girls for him. Maxwell now faces multiple counts of perjury for allegedly lying in her own deposition about Epstein's sexual activities. Strauss said, quote, Maxwell lied because the truth as alleged was almost unspeakable, end of quote. It is possible, depending on a bail ruling and other factors, that Maxwell could eventually be held in the same facility where Epstein died, law enforcement sources said. Prosecutors called her a serious flight risk and asked that she be held pending trial. They said in a filing Thursday, quote, in short, Maxwell has 3 passports, large sums of money, extensive international connections, and absolutely no reason to stay in the United States and face the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence, end of quote. Maxwell had stayed below the radar since Epstein's death as speculation swirled about whether she could face repercussions for her friend's alleged abuses, and her whereabouts remained a mystery until her arrest. Federal prosecutors said that Maxwell paid cash through a limited liability company for the picturesque retreat where she was found, and the LLC had been established just a month before the secretive sale. 2 people familiar with the real estate deal said the description of the home matched a listing that sold for $1,070,750 last December. A person familiar with the transaction, which was shrouded in secrecy, told NBC News the buyer was an anonymous mystery woman, leading them to wonder if it was a big-name actress or celebrity. The 4,300 square foot estate sits at the top of a half-mile-long driveway, making it an ideal location for anyone looking to stay hidden. A handful of residents of Bradford, a town of 1,600 people, said they had never seen Maxwell in town, nor had they heard of her before Thursday. The FBI said that they knew Maxwell had been in New Hampshire, but they were waiting on the indictment to make the arrest. In a statement sent to NBC News following the arrest, a former alleged victim of Epstein said that she and other victims can now have some sense of relief. Jennifer Ayraz, who said in a Today Show interview last year that Epstein abused her when she was 15 years old, said, quote, today my fellow Epstein survivors and I are able to take a breath of relief as Maxwell's arrest means some justice for survivors can exist. For years I feared Epstein and his ring. Maxwell was the center of that sex trafficking ring. Now that the ring has been taken down, I know that I can't be hurt anymore. End of quote. Ayraz said in a video interview with NBC News that she believes Maxwell, quote, knows so much that he also knew. So this is a way for us to get justice, end of quote. Referring to he, she means Epstein. Dan Kaiser, an attorney representing other Epstein victims, called Maxwell, quote, the architect of Epstein's sex ring and can now be held accountable, end of quote. Attorney Brad Edwards, who is also representing victims, said, quote, as for Ghislaine's importance in Jeffrey Epstein's organization as well as her loose affiliation with the truth, we have worked for years to expose both. Today brings us one step close to justice, end of quote. No court date has yet been set for the arraignment. William Sweeney, the FBI assistant director in charge in New York, said at a news conference, quote, "Today we announced the arrest of one of the villains in this investigation," end of quote. He added that Maxwell had, quote, "slithered away to a gorgeous property in New Hampshire, continuing to live a life of privilege," end of quote, before she was caught. Her arrest drew calls for justice at the highest levels. Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, in a statement Thursday, said, quote, "Epstein got a crooked sweetheart deal years ago that protected his co-conspirators like Maxwell. Maxwell has been on the run for months because she too hoped to escape justice. We can't let that happen again. Her victims deserve their day in court," end of quote. Sasse, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has pushed aggressively for the Justice Department to investigate what was described as a sweetheart deal that gave Epstein and others immunity from federal charges in 2007. Then Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta was involved in negotiating that deal, and 12 years later he resigned as Labor Secretary amid criticism of the arrangement. The case also ensnared British royalty, bringing an end to the royal duties of Epstein friend Prince Andrew. Prosecutors have been seeking to speak with him for months about his friendship with the financier and the allegations of abuse. Strauss said, quote, "We would welcome Prince Andrew coming in to talk with us. We would like to have the benefit of his statement," end of quote. So there it is, the continuing saga of Jeffrey Epstein and the Lolita Express, which was the nickname of his private jet where he flew young teenage girls to his private island and then raped them. Let's just call it what it was. It was rape. Let's get on to some other news stories. I have this from Emma Ackerman writing for Vice.com. This is dated July 1st. If some of the nation's wealthiest residents were planning on a quiet, leisurely retreat to their Hamptons estates ahead of the July 4th weekend, they're off to a bad start. A caravan of 200 protesters, some of them armed with plastic pitchforks, showed up outside the Long Island vacation homes of Michael Bloomberg and other wealthy investors Wednesday to decry the nation's rising income inequality, which has only gotten worse since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. The activists drove in from New York City and targeted the seaside destination where many rich New Yorkers stayed during the coronavirus crisis to argue that their plight is being ignored. Protesters chanted outside the 22,000-square-foot, $20 million mansion of former New York City Mayor and presidential candidate Bloomberg, "Tax the rich, not the poor." By the way, Bloomberg owns several other properties, so it's unclear whether he was at his Hamptons home at the time. Since March 18th, the combined wealth of all U.S. billionaires has surged by $584 billion. That is according to the progressive think tank Institute for Policy Studies. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and the richest person in the world, has gained an extra $43.8 billion, according to the group's analysis. The U.S. stock market is thriving. And I'm going to stop there for a quick second just to give my opinion. We need to stop looking at the stock market as the pulse of the country's economy, because all the stock market proves is that the rich are doing fine. The rest of us are not doing well whatsoever. There needs to be a better way to measure success in this country. There really does. Let me continue here. At the time, millions of low-income Americans are either out of a job, with Black and Latino Americans being particularly hard hit, or deemed essential enough to risk catching the virus while earning low wages. People can't pay rent and are facing eviction. Lines at food banks are horrifyingly long, and some states facing their own economic crises, including New York, are mulling budget cuts to the same public education and social services programs that could help lift people out of poverty once the pandemic abates. Alice Nascimento, the director of policy at the New York Communities for Change, one of the groups leading the protests, said, quote, "This is primarily about the fact that we're living in a time where the 0.1% are not only in control of our economy, but also our way of life. We're in the middle of a crisis, and ever since the pandemic started, the richest people in the world have only gotten richer. End of quote. She added that some protesters brought plastic pitchforks because they're a symbol of, quote, the working class rising up. End of quote. I've had a couple of people that have said, why plastic pitchforks? My response was, dry run? I don't know. Maybe they should use the real things. Maybe they should use something else. I don't know. Continuing the story, protesters included members of the Shinnecock Indian Nation, New York Communities for Change, the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, and others. They're hoping that Governor Andrew Cuomo pushes higher taxes on New York's wealthiest residents to pad the state's budget and avoid cuts to services that could help the poor during a downturned economy, according to Nascimento. To make their point heard, they also plan to head to the homes of Stephen Ross, a billionaire real estate developer, Steven Schwarzman, the CEO of the Blackstone Group, a massive real estate investment firm, and Daniel Loeb, the billionaire behind the hedge fund Third Point. Cuomo's office did not immediately respond to a Vice News request for comment, although he's previously been skeptical of raising taxes on the wealthy. A coalition of state legislators have also called for higher taxes on the richest New Yorkers this month, according to Newsday. Similar protests organized by groups including the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment will also take place across California later Wednesday at the homes of real estate magnates and Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. This is going to be the French Revolution all over again, folks. I called it years ago. I said there would be a civil war in this country, and that it wouldn't be North versus South, it'd be rich versus poor. We're starting to see that. We're at the early stages. And there have been people that are multimillionaires, billionaires, saying, this is unsustainable. We have to give up some of our wealth. They're calling for it. Tax us, they say. I wish it was more. I wish it wouldn't have to get to this point where there's protests, but you can only do what works. It's unreal. Like I said, I called it years ago. All right, let's get on to a little bit of some lighter news. I have this from Alex Young, writing for consequenceofsound.net. They're an entertainment website. They do a lot with the radio industry and cover the television industry as well. This article is dated June 28th. Sacha Baron Cohen is up to his old tricks. On Saturday, the Borat and Bruno actor crashed a far-right rally in Olympia, Washington, pretending to be a racist country singer who led a sing-along about injecting former President Barack Obama and Dr. Anthony Fauci with the Wuhan flu. Sacha Baron Cohen just gets right in there. I love it. The event was organized by a far-right militia group called the Washington 3 Percenters. It seems Cohen had reached out to event organizers about serving as the musical entertainment, going as far to offer to cover the cost of the stage and the sound system. The 3 Percenters took him up on his offer, setting the stage for one truly epic prank. Disguising himself in overalls and a fake beard, Cohen proceeded to sing a twangy country number about injecting liberals and scientists with the coronavirus. At various points throughout the song, Cohen encouraged the audience to sing along with him, and several individuals happily obliged. If you haven't seen the video of this, you need to go take a look at it. It's amazing. Event organizers eventually realized that Cohen was trolling the rally and attempted to pull the plug on his equipment. Cohen's security prevented them from doing so, however, allowing the comedian to continue unabashed for over 8 minutes. After the audience was clued in on the prank, Cohen and his band exited the stage and escaped the grounds via a private ambulance positioned nearby. But wait! Apparently Cohen later returned in a different disguise to interview the event's organizers about what went wrong. It's unclear whether Cohen's prank was for an upcoming project, though it definitely falls in line with the material featured in his most recent project, Showtime's Who is America? Let me read some of these tweets from this rally, whatever you want to call it. Shannon Watts posted this on Twitter. It says, this post is by a city council member in Yelm, Washington. Earlier this afternoon, Sacha Baron Cohen crashed the event of Washington 3%, a right-wing group of armed insurrectionists and white supremacists in Olympia. I look forward to the video. So in Shannon Watts' tweet, he quotes the tweet of James Connor Blair. Again, this is a city council member in Yelm, Washington. He wrote this, quote, Sacha Baron Cohen pulled a bullshit stunt at the March for Our Rights 3 event. Disguised as a pack out of Southern California, paid for the stage setup and musical entertainment, came on stage disguised as the lead singer of the last band, singing a bunch of racist, hateful, disgusting shit. Oh, I love it. I love when he burns these morons. His security blocked event organizers from getting him off the stage or pulling power from the generator. After the crowd realized what he was saying and turned on him, his security then rushed the stage and evacuated them to a waiting private ambulance that was contracted to be their escape transport. It was a setup and smack in the face of the great people who put on this event, including Alan Acosta, Tessa Ashley, and Matt Marshall. Disgusted with what Sacha did, all for a bullshit stunt. End of quote. Yeah. No, I can tell you where the bullshit was. It was organizing this rally in the first place. Give me a break, folks. Brian Blake wrote this on his Twitter. Quote, my favorite part of Sacha Baron Cohen infiltrating the militia rally was his coming right back in a second disguise to interview the organizers about what happened. The guy's got some balls. End of quote. Yes, he does. I mean, he doesn't care. I'm glad that he's safe, but, you know, you probably shouldn't do that kind of stunt around those people because I'll just give you my opinion. 3%ers are absolutely off the chain nuts. They're insane. They're cuckoo. Speaking of cuckoo, I want to get to this story. This is at pathos.com. This is under the Friendly Atheist column. This is by Val Wild, writing on July 1st. Say what you will about Answers in Genesis, and there's a lot to say, but its infamous frontman, Ken Ham, has a knack for jumping headlong into any and every cultural moment and twisting it to make it about creationism. Now, as people grapple with racism as a fundamental part of America's historical legacy, Ham is harnessing the power of what he calls cancel culture to take a shot at evolution by asking, should we cancel Charles Darwin? He raised the questions in a recent episode of Answers News, discussing the issue with co-hosts Bodie Hodge and Avery Foley, and followed it up with a written piece on his own Answers in Genesis blog. In the discussion between Ham, Hodge, and Foley, it becomes clear that what they mean when they say cancel Charles Darwin is actually discard the theory of evolution altogether. Consider Foley's complaint. Quote, people are all upset about these Confederate statues and things like that. But what about Charles Darwin? Because he was extremely racist, and yet he's celebrated. He's taught in public schools across the nation, in colleges across the nation. Hodges adds in the textbooks. And he continues, and yet he was horribly racist, so why are we not upset about Darwin and wanting to cancel him? End of quote. But no one has argued that the history of the Civil War should be removed from textbooks or erased from the American history curriculum. Just that it shouldn't be commemorated in statues that depict efforts to preserve the institution of slavery as heroic. Here, Foley complains that the work of Darwin continues to appear in schools at all. Once again, Ham and his colleagues have failed to distinguish between the well-documented scientific phenomenon of evolution and the man who first publicized his observations on the subject. It is a classic ad hominem attack, pointing to genuinely racist things Darwin said to invalidate the theory of evolution without ever having to address the merits of the theory itself. The Answers in Genesis response is itself based on a June 23rd opinion piece written by Peter Heck for conservative Christian outlet Discern. Just like Answers in Genesis, Heck fails to differentiate between Charles Darwin's racist beliefs and his well-tested observations about natural selection. Heck wrote this, quote, "Even by the most generous of measures, the intellectual and philosophical heritage of Charles Darwin is one of the most hideously racist legacies one can fathom, and yet his inherently racist dogma is not only presented in public schools across America, it is state and federal policy that every student in America demonstrate proficiency in understanding and applying his dangerous ideology." End of quote. In addition to conflating Darwin, the man, with the scientific observations he made, Heck argues that because the theory of natural selection has been used to justify racist projects such as slavery and eugenics, the entire enterprise is tainted and the very concept of evolution must be discarded. In other words, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Continuing the story, if that's how he feels about ideologies that have been used to justify historic atrocities, well, have I got some news for him about Christianity. But what sets science apart from so many other fields of inquiry, philosophy or literature or religion, to name just a few, is that the scientific method allows other people to test and examine a hypothesis, such as Darwin's, to see if further observation confirms or disproves Darwin's claims. Over time, the ideas advanced by Darwin have become divorced from their origins as more and more people make observations and confirm that, whatever he believed, his hypothesis remains consistent with what we observe of the natural world. Even if we did collectively decide to cancel Darwin, the theory of evolution would still be a scientific reality, one that answers in Genesis and other creationists desperately want to avoid engaging by any means necessary, precisely because it has been so fundamental to our scientific progress. But neither Heck nor Ham is really interested in scientific progress. They're here with a religious agenda. Ham makes that very clear when he attributes motives to the people who are failing to cancel Charles Darwin. Quote, "They won't touch Darwin because he is like a god to them. Why? Well, his ideas give people a supposed justification to reject God and do whatever they want with sex, determine right and wrong for themselves, have an abortion, and so on. Ultimately, it's a spiritual issue." End of quote. Nobody thinks Charles Darwin is a god, but failure to teach students about evolution by natural selection leaves them with a massive gap in their knowledge that hamstrings their basic scientific literacy. Look, Charles Darwin undoubtedly held racist beliefs. He was a product of Imperial Britain, and his writings show that he took for granted many of the era's unexamined assumptions, including the spurious racial hierarchies used to justify British dominion over other people, the same hierarchies that justified slavery in America and across the British Commonwealth. But whatever he believed about race, and even though his theory has been misused to advance racist agendas, the science of evolution doesn't support racism. That phrase doesn't even make sense. Our understanding of the subject has, yes, evolved since the 1800s. No matter how much organizations like Answers in Genesis would rather pretend that our science, like their dogma, remains frozen in time, unchanging, and easy to pick apart. And that's going to wrap things up for this week, folks. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson for Jack Prince and Kristen Cook. Please support independent media and the First Amendment.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.